December 27th, 1571. A premature infant enters the world 7 months after conception, so weak that survival seems impossible. The midwife doesn't expect him to last the night. His mother, already worn down by poverty and superstition, prepares for the worst. But the child lives. Against every probability, he survives. That fragile baby would grow up to discover the laws governing every planet in our solar system, revolutionize astronomy, and lay the foundation for Newton's physics. His name was Johannes Kepler, and his story is one of the most unlikely triumphs in the history of science. Picture the Holy Roman Empire in the late 16th century. It's a patchwork of territories, each with its own ruler, its own laws, its own version of Christianity tearing itself apart. The Protestant Reformation has split Europe into warring factions. Catholics and Protestants view each other with genuine hatred. Religious violence erupts constantly. Entire towns change hands between faiths, and anyone on the wrong side faces exile, imprisonment, or death. This is the world Johannes Kepler is born into, and it will never let him forget it. His birthplace is Weil der Stadt, a small imperial free city in the Duchy of Württemberg, now part of southern Germany. The house where he's born sits near the town's defensive walls. You can still visit it today, though it's been rebuilt after a fire. The family isn't destitute, but they're sliding that direction. His grandfather had been mayor, a position of genuine respect, but his father, Heinrich Kepler, is something else entirely. Heinrich is a mercenary soldier, the kind of man who fights for whoever pays. He's violent, unreliable, and frequently absent. When he is home, he brings chaos. Johannes will later describe him with remarkable coldness in his personal notes. The father eventually abandons the family entirely when Johannes is 5 years old, disappearing into one of the countless wars plaguing Europe. No one knows exactly what happens to him. He might have died in battle. He might have deserted and started a new life elsewhere. Either way, he's gone. Katharina Kepler, Johannes's mother, is a different kind of problem. She's an herbalist and healer, which in this era means she walks a dangerous line. People come to her for remedies, for advice about ailments, for potions they believe will help with love, or luck, or revenge. Some call her wise, others whisper the word witch. She's abrasive, argumentative, impossible to ignore. Years later, these whispers will nearly destroy both her and her son. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Young Johannes is sickly from the start. That premature birth left him with a constitution that never quite catches up. He suffers from smallpox at age 4, which leaves his hands crippled and his vision damaged. He'll struggle with poor eyesight his entire life. A cruel irony for someone who will spend decades studying the heavens. He contracts other diseases throughout childhood. He's small, weak, frequently ill. Other children don't want him in their games. He spends long hours alone, and in that solitude, something remarkable develops. He begins to notice patterns. The family moves to Leonberg when Johannes is young, and it's there that he attends the local Latin school. Education in Württemberg follows a specific path designed by the Lutheran Church to identify and train promising boys for the ministry. It's a ladder out of poverty, but only for those who can climb it. The system is brutally meritocratic. You advance based purely on examination results. Your family connections mean nothing if you can't perform. Johannes performs brilliantly. Despite his physical weakness, despite the chaos at home, despite missing school during his frequent illnesses, he dominates every examination. His memory is extraordinary. He absorbs Latin, Greek, and mathematics with an ease that astonishes his teachers. But there's something else about him that sets him apart, something harder to define. He has an intensity, an obsessive focus that makes him simultaneously impressive and unsettling. He's not popular. His own writings make this clear. He describes himself as irritating, argumentative, Too eager to show off his intelligence, he picks fights over trivial points of logic. He corrects his teachers publicly. The other students find him insufferable, but the faculty recognizes his genius, and genius in this system is all that matters. At 13, he enters the lower seminary at Adelberg. This is a boarding school for boys being prepared for university. The discipline is strict, the schedule punishing. Students rise before dawn for prayers, attend lessons throughout the day, study late into the evening. The food is terrible, the dormitory's cold. Many students hate it. Kepler thrives. For perhaps the first time in his life, he's in an environment that values what he's good at. 2 years later, he advances to the higher seminary at Maulbronn. This is the final preparatory stage before university. The monastery building itself is magnificent, a Cistercian complex with soaring Gothic architecture. But the life inside is ascetic. The Lutheran Church is training these boys to be soldiers in a religious war, and comfort is not part of the program. Kepler excels here too, but something's changing. He's beginning to think about things that trouble him. He reads widely, far beyond the assigned curriculum. He encounters ideas that don't fit neatly into Lutheran orthodoxy. He starts keeping detailed notes about his own thoughts, his doubts, his questions. This habit of radical self-examination will stay with him forever. In 1589, at age 17, he's ready for university. He enrolls at the University of Tübingen, the intellectual heart of Lutheran Württemberg. This is what his entire education has been building toward. The university will train him in theology, and then he'll become a Lutheran minister, preaching in some town church, defending the faith against Catholic error. That's the plan. That's the expectation. That's what everyone assumes will happen. But Tübingen gives Kepler something he doesn't expect. It gives him astronomy. The university, in 1589, is a hotbed of intellectual ferment. The faculty includes some of the brightest minds in the Protestant world. They're navigating a tricky balance, maintaining Lutheran orthodoxy while also engaging with the new learning sweeping through European universities. Ancient texts are being rediscovered. New ideas about mathematics and natural philosophy are emerging. And buried in all of this is a theory that will change everything. Nicolaus Copernicus, a Polish mathematician and astronomer, had died 46 years earlier. Just before his death, he'd published a book proposing something radical. The Earth, he argued, is not the centre of the universe. Instead, the Earth and all the other planets orbit the Sun. This heliocentric model contradicted both common sense and the teachings of Aristotle, which the Church had long endorsed. It also seemed to contradict Scripture, which spoke of the Sun moving across the sky, not the Earth spinning beneath it. Most scholars ignored Copernicus or treated his model as a useful mathematical fiction, not a description of physical reality, but a few took it seriously. One of them was teaching at Tübingen. Michael Maestlin was professor of mathematics and astronomy. Publicly, he taught the traditional geocentric model, with Earth at the centre. This was the safe approach, the orthodox position. But in private discussions with his most talented students, Maestlin revealed what he truly believed. The Copernican system was not just mathematically elegant, it was true. The Earth really did orbit the Sun. When Kepler encountered this idea, something ignited in his mind. This wasn't just a different way of calculating planetary positions, this was a glimpse of God's actual design. The universe had a structure, a harmony, a mathematical perfection that could be discovered through careful reasoning. And if Copernicus was right, if the Earth truly orbited the Sun, then everything humanity thought it knew about its place in creation was wrong. Kepler became obsessed. He spent hours discussing the theory with Maestlin, working through the mathematics, understanding the implications. He read everything he could find about Copernican astronomy. And critically, he began to wonder about something that Copernicus himself hadn't fully explored. Why were the planets arranged the way they were? Why were there 6 known planets? Why were they spaced at their particular distances from the Sun? These questions had no answers yet, but they were the right questions, and asking them would eventually lead Kepler to discoveries that would transform human understanding of the cosmos. For now, though, he's still a theology student. His official studies continue. He takes courses in ethics, in biblical interpretation, in systematic theology. He's preparing for ordination as a Lutheran minister. But increasingly, his mind is elsewhere. He's thinking about circles and spheres, about the dance of planets across the sky, about the hidden mathematical order that must underlie creation. His professors notice the shift. Some are concerned. Theology is serious business in this era. The fate of souls hangs in the balance. A student who's distracted by astronomical speculation isn't fully committed to his calling. But others, particularly Mysterium, recognize that Kepler's gifts might be better suited to a different path. In 1594, an unexpected opportunity arrives. A Protestant school in Graz, a city in the Austrian province of Styria, needs a mathematics teacher. Their previous instructor has died, and they're looking for a replacement. It's not a prestigious position. Teaching mathematics ranks far below teaching theology. The salary is modest. Graz itself is a backwater compared to the great university cities. But someone has to take the job. Mysterium suggests Kepler. The university faculty agrees. And just like that, at age 22, Johannes Kepler's path diverges from the ministry. He accepts the position in Graz, though not without reservations. He feels called to serve God through the church. Mathematics seems like a distraction from that higher purpose, but he trusts his mentor's judgment, and besides, he needs employment. The job might be temporary, just a few years before he returns to complete his theological training. He has no way of knowing that he'll never return to that path. He has no way of knowing that this obscure teaching position in Graz will set in motion a chain of events that will lead to the most important astronomical discoveries since Copernicus. He has no way of knowing that within 2 years he'll experience a moment of insight so powerful that he'll remember the exact date, the exact hour, the exact place he was standing when it struck him. He packs his few belongings, says goodbye to Tübingen, and begins the journey southeast toward Austria. He's leaving behind everything familiar, heading toward an uncertain future in a city he's never seen. He's anxious, excited, and completely unprepared for what's waiting for him. The road to Graz winds through the hills of southern Germany and into the Alpine regions. Kepler makes the journey in stages, probably on foot for much of it, occasionally catching rides with merchants or other travellers. It takes weeks. He arrives in late summer, as the academic year is about to begin. Graz in 1594 is a provincial capital, home to perhaps 20,000 people. It sits on the Mur River, dominated by a massive hilltop fortress, the Schlossberg. The city has a university, founded just 15 years earlier, but it's small and underfunded. The Protestant school where Kepler will teach is even more modest, a seminary training boys for the Lutheran ministry. Kepler's job is to teach mathematics and astronomy to students who mostly don't care about either subject. His first year is a disaster. He's a terrible teacher. He admits this himself in his writings. He speaks too fast, assumes his students understand things they don't, gets lost in digressions that interest only him. His lectures are confusing. His students are bored and frustrated. Enrollment in his classes drops. By his second year, he has so few students that the school questions whether they should keep him on. But Kepler has other responsibilities. In addition to teaching, he's expected to produce an annual calendar and almanac, making astrological predictions for the coming year. This is standard practice. Every mathematician in this era is also an astrologer. The two fields haven't separated yet. People want to know when to plant crops, when weather changes might occur, when political upheavals might happen. They believe the stars influence earthly events, and they pay for predictions. Kepler is skeptical about much of astrology, but he's also pragmatic. He needs the income, so he produces his almanacs, making educated guesses about weather patterns and political developments. And in a stroke of extraordinary luck, several of his predictions come true. He predicts a harsh winter. It arrives. He predicts peasant uprisings. They break out. He predicts a Turkish invasion. The Ottomans attack the southern border of the empire. Suddenly Kepler is famous, or at least locally famous. People are calling him a prophet. His almanacs sell widely. The school can't fire him now. He's become a valuable asset. The irony isn't lost on him. He stumbled into exactly what he dreaded, but it's keeping him employed. And in his spare time, away from his struggling classroom and his profitable almanacs, Kepler is thinking about the structure of the cosmos. He's returning again and again to the questions that had first captivated him in Tübingen. Why 6 planets? Why these particular distances? What is God's design? And then on a day in July 1595, while drawing a geometric figure on a blackboard for a class that probably wasn't paying attention, something clicks in Kepler's mind. He's explaining the orbital periods of Jupiter and Saturn, how they align every 20 years in a pattern that shifts slowly through the zodiac. He draws a triangle connecting their positions. Then, almost without thinking, he inscribes a circle inside the triangle and another circle outside it. The ratios between these circles approximate something. Not perfectly, but close enough to make him pause mid-sentence. What if the distances between planetary orbits aren't arbitrary? What if they're determined by geometry, by the perfect three-dimensional shapes that the ancient Greeks had identified? There are exactly 5 such shapes: the Platonic solids, the tetrahedron with 4 triangular faces, the cube with 6 square faces, the octahedron with 8 triangular faces, the dodecahedron with 12 pentagonal faces, the icosahedron with 20 triangular faces. These are the only possible regular polyhedra. No others can exist, and there are 6 planets, 5 gaps between them, 5 Platonic solids. The match seems too perfect to be coincidence. Kepler abandons his lesson. He rushes back to his lodgings and begins calculating. If you nest these solids in the right order, each one inscribed within a sphere, and that sphere inscribed within the next solid, do the portions match the planetary orbits. He works through the night. By morning, he has a model. Between the orbit of Saturn and Jupiter, place a cube. Between Jupiter and Mars, a tetrahedron. Between Mars and Earth, a dodecahedron. Between Earth and Venus, an icosahedron. Between Venus and Mercury, an octahedron. The fit isn't perfect. The observations available to Kepler are based on Copernican data, which itself was based on centuries of accumulated records, many of them imprecise. But the correspondence is close enough that Kepler is convinced. This must be it. This is God's geometric blueprint for the cosmos. He's found the hidden architecture of creation. The excitement he feels is almost unbearable. He's 24 years old, stuck in a provincial teaching job in a backwater city, and he's just uncovered what he believes is the fundamental design principle of the universe. He has to publish this. He has to share it with the world. Over the next year, Kepler writes his first book, Mysterium Cosmographicum, the cosmographic mystery. It's part astronomy, part theology, part mathematics, part wild speculation. He lays out his nested polyhedra model in obsessive detail. He calculates the ratios, compares them to Copernican distances, defends every discrepancy. He explains why God would have chosen this particular design. 6 planets because there are only 5 perfect solids. These distances because geometry demands them. This order because it reflects divine wisdom. The book is strange, even by the standards of Renaissance astronomy, which regularly mixed mathematics with mysticism. Kepler's approach is unusual. He's openly Copernican, which is still a minority position. He's attempting to explain not just how the planets move, but why they're arranged this way, a question most astronomers consider unanswerable. And he's claiming to have found a pattern that reveals God's intentions. Most scholars would have dismissed it, but Kepler sends copies to the leading astronomers of Europe, and something surprising happens. They take him seriously, not because they believe his nested polyhedra model, most don't, but because the book demonstrates something undeniable. This young mathematician from Graz can think. His calculations are sophisticated. His geometric reasoning is clever. His commitment to the Copernican system is bold, even where he's wrong. He's interestingly wrong. Galileo receives a copy in Padua. He writes back politely, thanking Kepler but admitting he hasn't fully embraced Copernicanism himself. Michael Meislin, Kepler's old teacher, is supportive but cautious. Others are more critical, but one response matters more than all the rest. In Prague, the imperial mathematician Tycho Brahe reads the Mysterium Cosmographicum with fascination. Tycho is the greatest observational astronomer alive. For 2 decades, from his observatory on the island of Hven, he's been measuring planetary positions with unprecedented precision. His data is the best that exists anywhere. No one else comes close, and Tycho has a problem. He's developed his own model of the cosmos, a compromise system where the Earth remains stationary while the other planets orbit the Sun. It's geometrically equivalent to Copernicus, but philosophically more acceptable because it preserves the Earth's central position. The trouble is, even with his superior observations, Tycho can't quite make his model work perfectly. The numbers don't fit as cleanly as they should. He needs someone who can handle complex calculations, someone who understands geometric models, someone who isn't afraid of difficult mathematics. When he reads Kepler's book, he sees potential. This young man is exactly the kind of theoretical mind that could complement Tycho's observational genius. In February 1598, Tycho writes to Kepler, inviting him to visit Prague. It's a cautious invitation, feeling out whether Kepler might be interested in collaboration. Kepler is thrilled. To work with Tycho Brahe, to have access to his observations, this could be everything. But he's also wary. He's heard that Tycho is difficult, possessive of his data, jealous of his reputation. And Kepler has his own ideas, his own models. He doesn't want to become merely an assistant. The correspondence continues through 1598 and into 1599. Kepler is interested but hesitant. And then circumstances make the decision for him. In 1598, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria, a devout Catholic, takes control of Styria, the province where Graz is located. Ferdinand is determined to re-Catholicize his territories. He begins issuing decrees. Protestant schools must close. Protestant teachers must convert or leave. Protestant preachers are expelled from the city. Kepler watches the situation deteriorate. In September 1598, he and other Protestant teachers are ordered to leave Graz within 48 hours. They're allowed to return a few weeks later after negotiations, but the writing is on the wall. Kepler's position is untenable. The school might close. Even if it doesn't, his job is precarious. His safety is uncertain, and he has a family now. In 1597, Kepler had married Barbara Müller, the daughter of a wealthy mill owner. It was not a love match. Barbara was practical, conventional, uninterested in her husband's astronomical obsessions. The marriage was arranged largely for financial reasons. Barbara brought a modest dowry, and Kepler needed the security. They have a daughter, but the child dies in infancy. Barbara is pregnant again. Kepler needs a stable situation, and Graz is no longer stable. Tycho's invitation suddenly looks less like an opportunity and more like a lifeline. In January 1600, Kepler makes his decision. He'll go to Prague. He packs his belongings, settles his affairs in Graz, and begins the journey north. He doesn't know if this is a visit or a permanent move. He doesn't know how Tycho will actually receive him. He doesn't know if he'll be able to return to Graz or if his family will join him. Everything is uncertain. But he's going to meet the greatest observer in Europe. He's going to see Tycho's daughter. Maybe, just maybe, he'll find the precision he needs to prove his theories. The road to Prague takes him through the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. He travels in winter, through snow and cold. It takes weeks. He arrives in early February, tired, anxious, and desperate. Tycho Brahe is waiting. But the collaboration Kepler imagined, the meeting of minds that would unlock the secrets of the heavens, is about to become something much more complicated, because Tycho Brahe is not a man who shares easily. The castle of Benátky, where Tycho has established his observatory after leaving Denmark, sits about 20 miles outside Prague. It's not Haven. Tycho's island observatory had been a scientific paradise, custom-built with royal funding, equipped with the finest instruments in Europe. Benátky is a compromise, a nobleman's estate hastily converted into a working observatory. But it's what Tycho has, and it's where Kepler arrives in February 1600, expecting to begin the collaboration that will change astronomy forever. The reality is immediately disappointing. Tycho greets Kepler cordially, but cautiously. He shows him around, introduces him to the small team of assistants, demonstrates some of the instruments. But when it comes to the observations, the precious data that Kepler desperately wants to see, Tycho is evasive. He'll share some numbers, but not all. He'll discuss general patterns, but not specific measurements. He's friendly, but guarded. Kepler realizes with sinking clarity that Tycho has no intention of giving him full access to the observations. Why would he? Tycho has spent decades accumulating this data. It's his life's work, his claim to fame, his competitive advantage. He's not going to hand it over to a young mathematician he barely knows, especially one who's openly committed to the Copernican system that Tycho himself rejects. If Kepler wants the data, he'll have to earn it. He'll have to prove his value. He'll have to work under Tycho's direction, on Tycho's problems, using Tycho's methods. The arrangement Tycho proposes is essentially employment. Kepler will assist with calculations. He'll help reduce observations, check arithmetic, prepare tables. In return, he'll receive a modest salary, and eventually, maybe, access to more data. It's not what Kepler hoped for. He didn't travel to Prague to become a clerk. He came to test his theories, to find the geometric harmonies he believes govern planetary motion. He needs the observations, but he needs them on his own terms. Tensions emerge almost immediately. Kepler is proud, intellectually independent, convinced of his own insights. Tycho is controlling, secretive, protective of his authority. They argue about methods, about interpretation, about who deserves credit for which ideas. Within weeks of Kepler's arrival, the relationship is strained. Kepler writes bitter letters to friends. He describes Tycho as miserly with his data, petty about recognition, impossible to work with. He's stuck in a castle with a man who won't give him what he needs, dependent on a salary he desperately requires, unable to return to Graz where the situation for Protestants continues to worsen. He feels trapped, but he stays. He has no choice. And Tycho, for all his faults, recognizes something. This difficult, prickly young mathematician is brilliant. His geometric intuitions are extraordinary. His willingness to pursue calculations to absurd lengths is exactly what Tycho's observations require. They need each other, even if neither particularly likes admitting it. In April 1600, Kepler returns briefly to Graz to collect Barbara and their belongings. The situation there has deteriorated further. Protestant worship is now forbidden. Kepler's position at the school is gone. He gathers what he can, says goodbye to the city where he stumbled into fame, and makes the journey back to Prague with his pregnant wife. They arrive in June. Kepler has no home, no permanent position, no certainty about his future. What he has is proximity to the best astronomical data in the world and a man who won't let him see it. The standoff continues through the summer, and then, in October 1600, Tycho Brahe moves his household and observatory to Prague proper. The Emperor Rudolf II, a Habsburg monarch more interested in alchemy and art than governance, has officially appointed Tycho as imperial mathematician. It's a prestigious position with a generous salary. Tycho establishes himself in a house in the city, sets up his instruments, and continues his observations. Kepler follows. He's now officially part of Tycho's household, though his role remains unclear and his access to data remains restricted. But proximity matters. Living in the same city, working in the same rooms, Kepler begins to see more. He watches Tycho work. He observes the routines of measurement, the careful recording of angles, the nightly vigils tracking planets across the sky. He begins to understand the depth of what Tycho has accomplished. These observations aren't rough estimates, they're precise to within a single arc minute, better than anything that's ever existed. The positions of Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, recorded night after night, year after year, a treasure trove of data that could unlock the secrets of planetary motion. Kepler needs that data. Specifically, he needs Mars. The red planet has always been the problem child of astronomy. Its motion is irregular, refusing to fit neatly into circular orbits. Ptolemy struggled with it. Copernicus struggled with it. Every astronomer who's tried to predict Mars accurately has failed. But Kepler sees opportunity in that failure. If he can solve Mars, if he can find the true shape of its orbit, he'll have discovered something fundamental about how planets actually move. Tycho assigns him the problem. Perhaps it's a test. Perhaps Tycho himself is frustrated with Mars and hopes Kepler's geometric approach might help. Either way, Kepler throws himself into it. He begins calculating, trying to fit Tycho's observations into various orbital models, searching for the pattern. The work is brutal. Each model requires hundreds of calculations. Kepler fills page after page with numbers, testing one configuration, finding it fails, adjusting, testing again. He works through the fall of 1600, into winter, into spring. Barbara is pregnant again. Their finances are precarious, and Kepler is spending 18 hours a day wrestling with the orbit of Mars. Then everything stops. On October 13th, 1601, Tycho Brahe attends a formal dinner at the palace of a nobleman. It's a long meal, multiple courses, plenty of wine. Tycho, always conscious of etiquette, refuses to leave the table even when his bladder becomes painfully full. To excuse oneself during a formal dinner would be a serious breach of manners. He holds it and holds it. By the time he's finally able to relieve himself, the damage is done. He develops what appears to be a urinary blockage, possibly a bladder infection, possibly kidney stones. The pain is excruciating. He takes to his bed. Days pass. The pain worsens. Fever sets in. Kepler visits him. Tycho, delirious with fever, makes a strange request. He wants Kepler to promise something. That after Tycho's death, Kepler will complete the astronomical tables they've been working on. That he'll use Tycho's observations, and crucially, that he'll demonstrate how those observations support not the Copernican system, but Tycho's own hybrid model, where the planets orbit the Sun, but the Sun orbits the Earth. Kepler, sitting beside the dying man, makes the promise. Whether he means it is another question. On October 24th, 1601, Tycho Brahe dies. He's 54 years old. His final words, repeated over and over in his delirium, are reported as, "Let me not seem to have lived in vain." Within hours, Kepler is writing letters to friends, to patrons, to anyone who might help secure his position. Tycho's death creates a vacancy. The position of imperial mathematician is suddenly open. Kepler wants it, desperately, but more importantly, Tycho's death means the observations are now accessible. Tycho's heirs, who inherit the instruments and records, don't fully understand their value. They're grieving, they're dealing with estate matters, and Kepler is right there, offering to help organise the papers, to continue the work, to honour Tycho's legacy. He gets his hands on the data, not officially at first. He borrows notebooks, copies observations, promises to return them. Some he doesn't return. It's not quite theft, but it's not quite honest either. Kepler would later admit he had to steal the observations, that Tycho's heirs would never have given them freely to someone who intended to use them for Copernican purposes. The ethical lines are blurred, but Kepler doesn't hesitate. He has what he needs now: the most accurate astronomical observations ever made, and a problem that's consumed him for over a year: the orbit of Mars. In November 1601, Emperor Rudolf II officially appoints Kepler as imperial mathematician. It's a remarkable promotion for a 30-year-old with no significant publications beyond the Mysterium. The salary is generous, though getting the Habsburg treasury to actually pay it will prove difficult. But the title is real, the position is secure, and Kepler finally has the authority and resources to pursue his work. He returns to Mars with renewed intensity. He knows the orbit is wrong in the standard models. The question is what shape it actually takes. His first instinct is to try variations on circles. Maybe Mars doesn't orbit in a perfect circle, but in a circle that's slightly off-center. He calculates. The model fails. He tries a different offset. Fails again. He tries combinations of circles, epicycles, adjustments. Nothing works. The observations are too precise. Any model he constructs that fits some of Tycho's data points fails spectacularly on others. The discrepancies are small, just 8 arc minutes in some cases, but they're real. 8 arc minutes is roughly 1/4 the width of the full moon. It's tiny. Most astronomers would ignore such a small error, attribute it to observational uncertainty, and move on. Kepler doesn't. He knows Tycho's observations are accurate to within 2 arc minutes. An 8 arc minute error isn't measurement uncertainty. It's the model itself that's wrong. The orbit is not a circle, or any combination of circles. It must be something else. But what? For 2,000 years, everyone has assumed that celestial bodies move in circles. Aristotle said so. Ptolemy built his entire system on it. Even Copernicus, revolutionary as he was, kept circular orbits. Circles are perfect, eternal, divine. The heavens are perfect, therefore their motions must be circular. It's not just astronomy, it's philosophy, it's theology. Kepler begins to consider the unthinkable. What if orbits aren't circular at all? What if the ancient assumption that's guided astronomy since the Greeks is simply wrong? He starts testing other shapes. He tries ovals, too vague, mathematically imprecise, impossible to calculate. He tries various egg-shaped curves. They fit better than circles, but still not perfectly. He's grasping, trying shapes almost at random, hoping something will work. Months pass. 1602 turns into 1603. Kepler is filling notebooks at an extraordinary rate, testing hypothesis after hypothesis, calculating, checking against observations, failing, adjusting, calculating again. His work is becoming increasingly desperate. He writes to friends that Mars is defeating him, that the planet is mocking his efforts, that he's spent more time on this problem than he ever imagined possible. Barbara is pregnant again. Their finances are a constant worry. The imperial treasury is slow to pay, and when it does pay, it's often in debased coinage worth less than promised. Kepler takes on additional work, casting horoscopes for nobles, tutoring, anything to make ends meet, but most of his time, most of his energy goes to Mars. Then in late 1604, Kepler makes a breakthrough, not in the shape of the orbit itself, but in how the planet moves along that orbit. He's been assuming, as everyone has, that planets move at constant speed. But what if they don't? What if a planet moves faster when it's closer to the Sun and slower when it's farther away? He starts testing this idea mathematically. He divides the orbit into sections, calculates areas, looks for patterns, and he finds one. The rule is elegant. A line drawn from the Sun to the planet sweeps out equal areas in equal times. It doesn't matter where the planet is in its orbit. In any given period, say 30 days, the area swept by that imaginary line is constant. When the planet is close to the Sun and moving fast, the line sweeps a short, wide triangle. When the planet is far from the Sun and moving slowly, it sweeps a long, narrow triangle. But the areas are equal. This is Kepler's second law, though he doesn't call it that. He doesn't even recognize it as a fundamental law yet. To him, it's a useful mathematical tool, a way to calculate planetary positions more accurately. But it's revolutionary. No one has ever suggested that planetary speeds vary in this way. It's another crack in the ancient edifice. But he still doesn't have the orbit's shape. The second law tells him how fast Mars moves at different points, but not what path it follows. Back to the calculations. More shapes, more tests, more failures. By early 1605, Kepler is exhausted. He's been working on Mars for nearly 5 years. He's filled thousands of pages with calculations. He's tested dozens of orbital models. Nothing works. Then he tries an ellipse. An ellipse is a stretched circle, a curve with 2 focal points instead of 1 centre. It's been known since ancient Greece, studied by mathematicians, but never applied to astronomy. Why would it be? Circles are perfect. Ellipses are imperfect, asymmetric, inelegant. Kepler places the Sun at one focus of the ellipse and nothing at the other. Mars travels along the elliptical path. He calculates. He checks against Tycho's observations. The model fits perfectly. Every observation, every position of Mars recorded over decades, falls exactly onto the elliptical path. The 8-arc-minute discrepancies vanish. The orbit is an ellipse. He can barely believe it. He checks again and again. He tests different ellipses, different parameters. The same answer keeps appearing. Mars orbits the Sun in an ellipse with the Sun at one focus. It's not a circle. It's never been a circle. 2,000 years of assumption, overturned by a stubborn mathematician who refused to ignore 8-arc-minutes of error. Kepler will later write that the discovery felt like waking from a long sleep. For years he'd been trying to force the observations into circular orbits, bending the data, adding complications, creating elaborate mathematical machinery to save the appearances. Now, with a single elegant curve, everything made sense. But an ellipse, the philosophical implications are staggering. If orbits are elliptical, then the heavens aren't perfect. The divine order that philosophers and theologians have proclaimed for millennia doesn't exist, at least not in the form anyone imagined. The universe is messier, stranger, more interesting than the ancient picture allowed. Kepler writes it all down. The years of calculation, the false starts, the breakthrough. The result is a book called Astronomia Nova, the New Astronomy. It's published in 1609, 8 years after Tycho's death, 9 years after Kepler first arrived in Prague. The book is massive, detailed, exhausting. Kepler includes everything: his methods, his mistakes, his reasoning. He wants readers to follow his journey, to see how he arrived at truth through error and persistence. He also buries the lead. The elliptical orbit of Mars, the most important astronomical discovery in centuries, doesn't appear until well into the book. Kepler front-loads the text with discussions of physics, optics, and methodology. Modern readers skip ahead. 17th century readers may have done the same. But the discovery is there. The first law: planets orbit the Sun in ellipses with the Sun at one focus. The second law: a line joining a planet and the Sun sweeps out equal areas in equal times. These are 2 of the 3 laws that will bear Kepler's name. The third will come later. The Astronomia Nova doesn't create an immediate sensation. It's too technical, too mathematical, too strange. Most astronomers don't know what to make of elliptical orbits. They're useful for calculation, certainly. Kepler's tables predict planetary positions better than anything before. But do planets really move in ellipses? Or is this just another mathematical convenience, like Ptolemy's epicycles, useful but not necessarily true? Kepler insists they're real. The ellipse isn't a calculating trick, it's the actual path Mars follows through space. This insistence will cause him problems. Philosophers object, theologians worry, even fellow Copernicans are skeptical. Galileo, who's making his own revolutionary observations with a telescope, largely ignores Kepler's ellipses. He prefers circles, but Kepler doesn't back down. He spent too many years, filled too many notebooks, checked too many calculations. He knows he's right. Mars orbits in an ellipse. So do the other planets. The cosmos operates according to mathematical laws he's beginning to uncover. There's harmony here, not in the mystical, geometric solids of his youth, but in the precise mathematical relationships governing motion. The work takes its toll. Kepler's eyesight, never strong, deteriorates from years of calculation by candlelight. His health suffers. His family suffers. Barbara, worn down by multiple pregnancies, constant moves, and financial instability, grows increasingly ill. Their children are sickly. Several die in infancy. The imperial treasury continues to pay irregularly, leaving Kepler perpetually short of funds. And then in 1611, catastrophe arrives, not as a single blow, but as a cascade of disasters that will test everything Kepler has built. The year 1611 begins with smallpox. It sweeps through Prague, hitting Kepler's household with brutal efficiency. His favourite son, 6-year-old Friedrich, falls ill first. The boy burns with fever, his skin erupting in pustules. Kepler watches helplessly as his child suffers. Medieval medicine offers nothing. Prayer offers less. Friedrich dies in February. Before the family can recover, the disease claims another victim. 7-year-old Susanna follows her brother. 2 children dead in a matter of weeks. Barbara, already weakened by years of illness and grief, collapses under the weight. She develops Hungarian spotted fever, a typhus-like disease. Her condition deteriorates rapidly. By July, she's gone. Kepler is 40 years old. In 6 months, he's lost a wife and 2 children. The political situation offers no comfort. Rudolf II, the eccentric emperor who's protected Kepler for over a decade, is losing his grip on power. His brother Matthias, sensing weakness, moves against him. Civil war threatens. Prague becomes unstable, dangerous. The imperial court, Kepler's source of employment and legitimacy, fractures. Rudolf abdicates most of his power in May 1611. He'll die the following year, broken and alone. Kepler's position evaporates with the old emperor's authority. Matthias has no interest in supporting a Protestant astronomer with strange ideas about planetary motion. The salary, already unreliable, stops entirely. Kepler needs to leave. But where? He's controversial, difficult, associated with a failed regime. He has debts, obligations, and the reputation of being brilliant but impractical. Finding another patron won't be easy. He turns to Linz, a provincial town in Upper Austria. The local authorities need a mathematician. The position pays less than Prague, offers less prestige, but it's something. Kepler accepts. In 1612, he packs his remaining possessions, gathers his surviving children, and leaves Prague behind. The city where he made his greatest discovery, where he lost so much, vanishes behind him. Linz is quiet. After the chaos of Prague, the relative calm feels strange. Kepler settles into new routines, new responsibilities. He teaches, he calculates, he publishes. But the work continues. The ellipse was just the beginning. Now he needs to understand why. Why ellipses? What force keeps planets in their paths? What determines their speeds? He suspects there's a mathematical relationship linking a planet's distance from the Sun to the time it takes to complete an orbit. The further out, the slower the motion. That much is obvious from observation. But what's the exact relationship? Linear? Squared? Something else? He attacks the problem with characteristic obsession. Tables of data accumulate. Calculations pile up. He tries different mathematical relationships, testing each against Tycho's observations. Nothing works. Close but not exact. He's missing something. Years pass. 1613, 1614, 1615. Still no breakthrough. The problem gnaws at him. He knows there's an answer. The universe operates by mathematical law. He's proven that with the ellipse. This relationship must exist. He just has to find it. Meanwhile, life intrudes. In 1613, Kepler remarries. Susanna Reutinger is 24. He's 42. It's not a love match initially, more a practical arrangement. Kepler needs a mother for his surviving children, a manager for his chaotic household. But affection grows. Susanna proves capable, patient with his obsessions, accepting of his strange work. The marriage brings stability he desperately needs. Children arrive, healthy children this time, mercifully. The household expands, becomes noisy with new life. Kepler balances domestic responsibilities with astronomical calculation. The notebooks never stop growing. Then, in 1618, breakthrough. After nearly a decade of searching, the pattern suddenly becomes clear. The relationship between orbital period and distance isn't linear. It's not simply proportional. It's something more elegant. The square of the orbital period is proportional to the cube of the semi-major axis. Said differently, take any planet's year, square it. Take its average distance from the Sun, cube it. The ratio is constant for every planet in the solar system. This is the third law. Combined with the first two, it completes Kepler's transformation of astronomy. The universe operates according to precise mathematical relationships that human minds can discover and understand. No mysticism required, no perfect circles necessary, just observation, calculation, and the willingness to follow truth wherever it leads, even if it contradicts ancient wisdom. The discovery appears in a book called Harmonices Mundi, published in 1619. The title means Harmony of the World, and it's vintage Kepler, mixing rigorous mathematics with mystical speculation. He's still searching for cosmic harmony, still convinced the universe reflects divine order. But now the harmony isn't in Platonic solids, it's in mathematical laws governing motion. The book ranges wildly. Music theory, geometry, astrology, astronomy, all woven together in Kepler's distinctive style. The third law is buried in Book 5, presented almost casually after hundreds of pages of other material. Kepler knows what he's found. He marks the date, May 15th, 1618. He writes that he'd waited 16 years for the insight and that nothing could restrain his joy. But Europe in 1618 has other concerns. The 30 Years' War is beginning, a catastrophic religious conflict that will devastate Central Europe for a generation. Protestant versus Catholic, political ambition masked as theological necessity, armies marching, cities burning. Kepler's astronomical discoveries seem irrelevant compared to the immediate horror of war. Linz itself becomes dangerous. As a Protestant in Catholic Austria, Kepler faces increasing pressure. The Counter-Reformation is intensifying. Authorities demand conformity. Kepler refuses to convert. He's Lutheran by conviction, uncomfortable with Catholic doctrine, unwilling to pretend otherwise for political convenience. This stubbornness costs him. He's excluded from communion, marked as religiously unreliable, viewed with suspicion. The local church refuses him sacraments. He's too Protestant for Catholics, too heterodox for strict Lutherans. Religious outcasts rarely fare well during religious wars. Another disaster strikes in 1620. Kepler's mother, Katharina, is accused of witchcraft. She's 74, living in Kepler's childhood town of Weil-der-Stadt. The charges are absurd but deadly serious. Witchcraft accusations are common in early modern Germany, usually targeting elderly women who are poor, argumentative, or socially isolated. Katerina qualifies on all counts. She's quarrelsome, sharp-tongued, skilled with herbs. Neighbours claim she's cursed them, caused illnesses, practiced dark arts. The accusations multiply. Testimony is gathered. Torture is prepared. Kepler learns of his mother's arrest and immediately drops everything. He can't ignore this. Katerina raised him, supported his education when the family had nothing, believed in him when others saw only a sickly boy with strange interests. He travels to Weil der Stadt, arriving to find his mother imprisoned, facing trial, likely execution if convicted. The legal process is nightmarish. Accusations are vague, evidence is hearsay, but the machinery of justice grinds forward. Kepler throws himself into her defense. He's not a lawyer, but he's brilliant, articulate, capable of constructing logical arguments. He writes briefs, challenges witnesses, exposes contradictions. He leverages his reputation as imperial mathematician, suggesting that perhaps the mother of such a man deserves careful consideration. The case drags on for 6 years. 6 years of legal manoeuvring, of travelling between Linz and Weil der Stadt, of fighting a system designed to produce confessions and executions. Katerina is threatened with torture, shown the instruments, told what awaits if she doesn't confess. She refuses. She's terrified but defiant. Kepler's mother is as stubborn as her son. Finally, in 1621, the authorities relent. The case against Katerina collapses under Kepler's relentless defense. She's released broken in health, but alive. She returns home and dies 6 months later, never recovering from the ordeal. Kepler has saved her from execution, but couldn't save her from the trauma. The witch trial consumes years that Kepler might have spent on astronomy. But family loyalty overrides professional ambition. He couldn't let his mother die. The cost is high. His astronomical work slows. His financial situation worsens. The war makes everything harder. Travel is dangerous. Communication is disrupted. Patronage dries up as nobles focus on survival rather than supporting mathematicians. Kepler needs a new project, something that can secure his reputation and perhaps attract better employment. He returns to an old promise, the Rudolphine tables. Back in Prague, Rudolf had commissioned comprehensive astronomical tables, predictions of planetary positions more accurate than anything previously available. Kepler had agreed to produce them. That was 20 years ago. The tables remain unfinished. He decides to complete them. It's an enormous task. Every planetary position must be calculated using his new laws. The math is brutal, repetitive, unforgiving. Kepler works without computers, without calculators, without assistants. Just pen, paper, and his own mind. He calculates for years, position by position, date by date, planet by planet. The work is exhausting, tedious beyond description, but it's necessary. These tables will be his gift to astronomy, his practical contribution. Theoretical laws matter, but astronomers need tools. The Rudolphine tables will provide them. By 1627, they're finished. Kepler travels to Ulm to oversee printing. The printing itself becomes an adventure. Presses break. Typesetters make errors. Kepler supervises everything, checking every number. The book that finally emerges is massive, comprehensive, precise. It includes tables for calculating planetary positions decades into the future. It lists eclipses, conjunctions, transits. It's everything an astronomer could need. The dedication page includes a portrait of Tycho Brahe. Kepler hasn't forgotten. Without Tycho's data, none of this would exist. The tables bear Rudolf's name, but they're built on Tycho's observations and Kepler's calculations. The publication is a triumph, but Kepler's situation continues to deteriorate. The war has destroyed his financial security. The imperial treasury owes him years of back salary. He travels to Regensburg in 1630, hoping to collect something, anything. The journey is difficult, roads are dangerous. He's 58, not young, not healthy. He arrives in Regensburg exhausted. The imperial court is there, but chaos reigns. Officials shuffle papers, make promises, deliver nothing. Kepler waits. He lodges in a cheap room, conserving his meagre funds. He develops a fever. Within days it worsens. He takes to bed, too weak to travel. On November 15th, 1630, Johannes Kepler dies in a rented room in Regensburg, far from home, largely unnoticed by the city around him. He's buried in a Protestant cemetery outside the town walls. The grave marker notes his achievements: mathematician, astronomer, imperial mathematician to Rudolf II. A few friends attend. The war continues around them. Indifferent to the passing of genius, the grave itself won't survive. 3 years later, Swedish troops will overrun Regensburg. The cemetery will be destroyed. Kepler's grave lost. No physical marker remains. What survives are the laws, the tables, the books. The revolution he started is just beginning. Within decades, Isaac Newton will build on Kepler's work, discovering the universal law of gravitation that explains why planets follow elliptical paths. The mathematics Kepler pioneered will become the foundation of celestial mechanics. His insistence that the universe operates according to discoverable mathematical laws will transform science. But in November 1630, none of this is clear. Kepler dies owing money, seeking payment that will never come, buried in a temporary grave that won't last. The astronomical community barely notices. They're too busy with the war, with survival, with their own concerns. Years will pass before anyone fully appreciates what Kepler accomplished. The man who discovered how planets actually move through space dies almost forgotten. His work unfinished, his salary unpaid. Yet his legacy was already spreading in ways he could never have witnessed. The young men who would reshape science had begun reading his work, studying his methods, absorbing his revolutionary approach to understanding the cosmos. In England, a boy named Isaac Newton was born the same year Kepler died. He would never meet the German astronomer, never correspond with him, never hear him lecture, but Newton would inherit Kepler's laws and transform them into something even more profound. Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, would explain why Kepler's laws worked. The elliptical orbits, the equal areas swept in equal times, the mathematical relationship between orbital period and distance, all of these emerged naturally from Newton's law of universal gravitation. Kepler had discovered that planets move in ellipses. Newton explained that they must move in ellipses because of how gravity operates. The foundation Newton built upon was Kepler's work. Without those three laws, without the precise mathematical descriptions of planetary motion, Newton might never have discovered gravity's universal nature. Science is cumulative. Each generation stands on the shoulders of those who came before. Kepler's shoulders bore Newton's weight, and through Newton, the weight of all modern physics. But Newton wasn't the only one who learned from Kepler. In Paris, astronomers used the Rudolphine tables to predict celestial events with unprecedented accuracy. Eclipses occurred exactly when Kepler's calculations said they would. Planetary positions matched his predictions. The practical value of his work became undeniable. Galileo never acknowledged Kepler's laws. The Italian astronomer, proud and brilliant, couldn't bring himself to accept that planetary orbits weren't circular. He died believing in perfect circles, blind to the truth his German contemporary had discovered. It's a reminder that even geniuses have blind spots, that reputation and stubbornness can prevent recognition of truth. The scientific revolution Kepler helped launch continued accelerating. His insistence that mathematics should describe physical reality became the standard approach. Before Kepler, astronomy was largely about prediction, about calculating positions without necessarily understanding why. After Kepler, astronomy became physics. The universe wasn't just observed, it was comprehended. Consider what Kepler accomplished with the tools available to him. No computers, no calculators, no differential calculus. Newton would invent that later. Just arithmetic, geometry, trigonometry, and relentless calculation. He computed planetary positions by hand, sometimes repeating calculations 70 times to eliminate errors. The mental stamina required is almost incomprehensible, and he did this while battling poverty, war, religious persecution, and personal tragedy. Most people facing a fraction of Kepler's obstacles would have abandoned their work. He persisted because the question mattered more than the comfort. The truth about planetary motion was worth any sacrifice. His approach to science was distinctly modern. He formed hypotheses, tested them against data, discarded them when they failed, and refined them when they showed promise. This sounds obvious now, but it wasn't then. Most natural philosophers of his era relied on authority and logical deduction. Kepler insisted on empirical verification. If the math didn't match observations, the math was wrong, no matter how elegant or philosophically satisfying. The War of 30 Years, which had disrupted Kepler's final decade, would continue for 18 more years after his death. By its end in 1648, Central Europe lay devastated. Populations had been decimated, cities destroyed. The Holy Roman Empire was shattered beyond repair. In some regions, half the population perished from violence, disease, or starvation. Yet through this apocalyptic chaos, Kepler's book survived. Copies of the Rudolphine tables spread across Europe. His laws were taught in universities. Astronomers in England, France, Italy, and beyond studied his methods. Science, it turned out, was more durable than empires. Kepler's personal life had been marked by constant instability. He married twice. His first wife, Barbara, died after years of illness. His second wife, Susanna, survived him but faced poverty after his death. Of his 12 children, only 2 survived to adulthood. The infant mortality rates of the 17th century spared no one, not even genius astronomers. The financial struggles never ended. The imperial treasury owed him money when he died, debts that would never be paid. His widow had to fight for scraps, petitioning officials who barely remembered Kepler's name. She eventually received a small settlement, a fraction of what was owed. The empire he served had failed him completely, but Kepler hadn't worked for the empire. He'd worked for truth. The salary was necessary for survival, but the motivation came from elsewhere. He wanted to understand God's design. He believed the universe operated according to mathematical principles that human minds could discover. This conviction drove him through every obstacle. His mystical inclinations, which seem strange to modern readers, were inseparable from his scientific genius. He believed in the music of the spheres, in cosmic harmonies, in geometric perfection, underlying physical reality. Some of these beliefs were wrong. Planets don't produce actual music, but the intuition that mathematics describes nature was profoundly correct. This combination of mysticism and rigor characterizes much early modern science. Newton was an alchemist. Robert Boyle believed in transmutation. These men weren't scientific despite their mystical beliefs. The mysticism and the science emerged from the same impulse, the conviction that hidden patterns governed reality and human reason could uncover them. Kepler's 3 laws became the foundation of celestial mechanics, but his broader legacy extends further. He demonstrated that theoretical physics was possible, that mathematical laws could describe motion in the heavens. This insight transformed how humans understood their relationship to the cosmos. Before Kepler, the heavens seemed fundamentally different from Earth. Celestial bodies moved in perfect circles through crystalline spheres, governed by principles wholly unlike terrestrial motion. After Kepler, and especially after Newton, the distinction collapsed. The same forces acting on Earth operated throughout the universe. Reality was unified, comprehensible, governed by universal mathematical laws. This unification is perhaps the greatest achievement of early modern science. It transformed the cosmos from a mysterious realm governed by divine whim into a system operating according to discoverable rules. It didn't eliminate wonder. If anything, the mathematical elegance of planetary motion proved more awe-inspiring than the old geocentric models. But it changed the nature of that wonder from religious mystery to scientific comprehension. Kepler's working methods influenced how science would be practiced for centuries. His careful documentation, his willingness to show failed hypotheses alongside successful ones, his insistence on matching theory to observation, these became standard scientific practice. The new astronomy wasn't just a book of results, it was a narrative of discovery, showing the messy process of scientific investigation. This transparency was revolutionary. Most scientific works of the era presented finished conclusions without revealing the struggle behind them. Kepler showed his work, his mistakes, his false starts. He made science human, something achieved through effort rather than revealed through inspiration. Later scientists would follow this model. Darwin's Origin of Species walks readers through the evidence and reasoning. Einstein's papers explain not just what he discovered, but how he thought about problems. Modern scientific papers maintain this tradition, documenting methods so others can verify and build upon results. The precision Kepler demanded from astronomy set new standards. Before his work, astronomical predictions were often wildly inaccurate. After the Rudolphine tables, errors shrank dramatically. This precision had practical applications. Navigation improved, calendar reforms became possible. Astronomers could predict eclipses years in advance with confidence. But precision wasn't merely practical, it was philosophical. Kepler believed that God created an orderly universe, and that order should be precisely describable. Small errors weren't acceptable. They suggested either bad observations or wrong theories. This perfectionism, while occasionally frustrating, drove him to discoveries others would have missed. The ellipse itself was a profound conceptual breakthrough. For 2,000 years, circles had dominated astronomical thinking. Aristotle taught that celestial motion must be circular. Ptolemy constructed elaborate systems of circles within circles. Copernicus retained circular orbits. The circle seemed philosophically necessary, the perfect shape for perfect heavenly bodies. Kepler shattered this assumption. The universe didn't care about human aesthetic preferences. Planetary orbits weren't circular because that's what philosophers expected. They were elliptical because that's what the data showed. Accepting this required intellectual courage, a willingness to abandon centuries of tradition because the evidence demanded it. This willingness to follow evidence over intuition distinguishes science from philosophy. A philosopher might argue for circular orbits based on their elegance. A scientist checks what actually happens. Kepler was among the first to consistently choose observation over expectation. His law relating orbital period to distance contained within it the seeds of Newton's gravitational theory. The precise mathematical relationship, period squared proportional to distance cubed, implied some force connecting the sun and planets, some influence that weakened with distance. Kepler speculated about magnetic forces. Newton would identify gravity, but Kepler's law made clear that something physical, something describable mathematically, governed planetary motion. This was physics entering astronomy. Before Kepler, astronomy was geometry, calculating positions without explaining causes. After Kepler, astronomers asked why planets moved as they did. The question of mechanism became central. This shift from description to explanation characterizes modern science. The speed of planets varying along their orbits, faster near the sun, slower farther away, suggested that the sun exerted influence. Kepler imagined something like magnetic attraction, weakening with distance, He was wrong about the mechanism, but right about the principle. Something from the sun affected planetary motion. This insight, vague as it was, pointed toward universal gravitation. Newton would later prove that Kepler's laws followed inevitably from gravity's inverse square relationship. The ellipse wasn't arbitrary. It was the natural curve traced by a body orbiting under inverse square force. The equal area law emerged from conservation of angular momentum. The period-distance relationship reflected how gravitational force varies with radius. None of this was obvious in Kepler's time. He discovered the laws empirically, through exhaustive calculation and observation. That these laws later proved to be consequences of deeper principles validated his approach. The universe operated mathematically, and careful attention to data could reveal those mathematical patterns even without understanding underlying causes. Kepler's influence on later astronomy extended beyond his laws. His careful analysis of Mars's orbit established methods that astronomers would use for centuries. His work on optics, though less remembered, advanced understanding of how telescopes work. His lunar theory improved predictions of the moon's position. His work on logarithms made astronomical calculations more manageable. He was, in short, a working astronomer, as well as a theoretical genius. He didn't just propose grand ideas, he did the tedious computational work necessary to test them. This combination of theoretical insight and practical calculation became the model for productive science. The Protestant Reformation and Catholic Counter-Reformation, which so disrupted Kepler's life, inadvertently advanced science. Religious conflict drove scholars from country to country, spreading ideas across Europe. Kepler's exile from Graz brought him to Prague, where Tycho's data awaited. War and persecution scattered scientists, but their ideas travelled with them. The printing press, still relatively new, accelerated this spread. Kepler's books were published in multiple cities, distributed internationally, read by scholars across Europe. Science was becoming international, transcending political and religious boundaries. Truth didn't care which pope or emperor held power. Planetary motion followed the same laws whether observed by Catholics or Protestants. This universality of scientific truth helped establish science's authority. Political and religious leaders might disagree, but planetary positions calculated using Kepler's laws matched observations regardless of who did the calculating. Science offered a kind of objectivity that other forms of knowledge couldn't match. Kepler died largely unrecognized, his grave lost, his salary unpaid, but within a generation, his name was known to every serious astronomer in Europe. Within a century, his laws were taught as fundamental truths. Within 2 centuries, they were the foundation of space travel calculations. The man who struggled to feed his family, who fled war and persecution, who calculated by candlelight in rented rooms, had changed humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. Not bad for the sickly son of a mercenary and an innkeeper's daughter. The question that haunted Kepler throughout his career, why ellipses, would wait 60 years for an answer. When it came, it arrived through the mind of an Englishman who might seem Kepler's opposite in every way. Where Kepler was mystical and intuitive, Newton was cold and systematic. Where Kepler struggled financially, Newton held prestigious positions. Where Kepler published constantly, Newton hoarded his discoveries. Yet both men shared something crucial, an absolute conviction that nature followed mathematical laws and that human reason could discover them. Isaac Newton was born on Christmas Day, 1642, the same year Galileo died. The symmetry is almost too perfect, as if the universe arranged for one revolutionary to depart as another arrived. Newton's birth was premature. He was so small his mother said he could fit in a quart mug. No one expected him to survive. That he did was the first of many unlikely turns in a life that would reshape human knowledge. His childhood was miserable. His father died before Isaac was born. When Isaac was 3, his mother remarried and moved to a nearby village, leaving the boy with his grandmother. This abandonment, for that's what it felt like, left scars. Newton grew into a solitary, suspicious man who trusted almost no one and forgave nothing. He kept lists of his sins as a teenager, among them threatening my father and Mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. The rage was real. At school, Newton showed little early brilliance. He was absent-minded, useless at farm work, and generally considered unpromising, but something changed when he was sent to live with an apothecary. There he encountered books, chemicals, mechanical devices. His mind woke up. By the time he entered Cambridge University in 1661, he was ready to absorb everything. Cambridge, then, was intellectually stagnant. The curriculum hadn't changed in centuries. Students still studied Aristotle as if Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo had never lived. But Cambridge had something precious, a good library. Newton taught himself. He read Descartes and was unimpressed. Too much philosophy, not enough rigour. He read Kepler and recognised genius. He encountered Galileo's work on motion and saw its limitations. And he began developing his own ideas, filling notebooks with calculations and sketches that would later astound anyone who saw them. Then plague came to London in 1665. Cambridge closed. Students were sent home. Newton retreated to his family's farm in Woolsthorpe, Lincolnshire. He was 23 years old. Over the next 18 months in isolation, he would accomplish more than most scientists achieve in a lifetime. Later, Newton described these years with characteristic understatement. "I was in the prime of my age for invention." That's one way to put it. What he actually did was invent calculus, discover the law of universal gravitation, and develop his theories of optics and motion. It's difficult to think of any comparable burst of creative genius in history. Mozart at his peak, perhaps. Einstein in 1905. But even these comparisons feel inadequate. The calculus came first. Newton needed a mathematical tool to handle continuously changing quantities, velocities, accelerations, curves. The geometry of the ancients couldn't manage this. Algebra, still relatively new, wasn't quite enough. So Newton invented a new mathematics. He called it the method of fluxions. Today we call it calculus. It would become the most powerful mathematical tool ever developed, essential for physics, engineering, economics, and countless other fields. Newton invented it at 23 and told almost no one. Simultaneously, he was thinking about motion. Galileo had studied falling bodies and projectiles. Descartes had proposed that motion continued unless something stopped it. But no one had unified these insights into a coherent theory. Newton did. He formulated 3 laws of motion so fundamental that they're still taught to physics students today. First law: objects in motion stay in motion unless acted upon by force. Objects at rest stay at rest. This seems obvious now. It wasn't then. Aristotle had taught that motion required continuous force. Newton showed that force was needed only to change motion, not maintain it. Second law: force equals mass times acceleration. This simple equation, F equals ma, is deceptively profound. It relates force, mass, and motion in a precise, quantitative way. You can calculate exactly how much force is needed to accelerate any object at any rate. Engineering became possible. Third law: every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Push against a wall, the wall pushes back with equal force. This insight explains everything from why guns recoil to how rockets work in space. But Newton's greatest achievement during these plague years was recognizing that the force pulling an apple to the ground was the same force holding the moon in its orbit. Gravity wasn't just something that made things fall, it was a universal force operating everywhere, governing the motion of planets and stars. The famous apple story is probably true, though embellished. Newton himself told it late in life, Sitting in his garden, seeing an apple fall, he wondered, why does the apple fall straight down? Why doesn't it go sideways? And then, does this same force extend to the moon? If so, why doesn't the moon fall to Earth? The answer was that the moon was falling constantly. It was falling around the Earth, its sideways motion combined with gravitational attraction to produce an orbit. Newton calculated whether the force pulling apples downward, if extended to the moon's distance and weakened appropriately, would account for the moon's orbital motion. The numbers worked. This was the insight that would eventually lead to the Principia, Newton's masterwork, but that book wouldn't appear for 2 more decades. When Cambridge reopened in 1667, Newton returned, was elected a Fellow of Trinity College, and promptly became the university's most antisocial member. He ate in his rooms, avoided company, and worked obsessively on experiments. His work on optics came next. Newton bought prisms and began studying light. The prevailing theory held that white light was pure and colours were modifications of it. White light darkened or diluted in various ways. Newton proved this wrong with elegant experiments. He showed that white light was actually composed of all colours mixed together. A prism didn't create colours, it separated them. He demonstrated that each colour bent by a different amount when passing through glass, which explained rainbows and many other optical phenomena. When Newton announced these findings in 1672, the established figures in optics attacked him viciously. Robert Hooke, already famous for his work with microscopes, claimed Newton had stolen ideas from him. A baseless accusation. The controversy scarred Newton. He became even more reclusive, even more suspicious. He vowed to publish nothing further. For years he kept that vow. This pattern would repeat throughout Newton's career. He would make stunning discoveries, then hide them. He would solve problems, then refuse to share solutions. Colleagues would beg him to publish. He would refuse, unwilling to endure criticism. As a result, many of Newton's discoveries weren't known until years or decades after he made them. The calculus invented in the 1660s wasn't fully published until the 1700s, by which time Leibniz had independently invented it, leading to a bitter priority dispute. What finally dragged Newton back into the public eye was a question about comets. In 1684, 3 members of the Royal Society, Edmund Halley, Christopher Wren, and Robert Hooke, were discussing planetary motion. They suspected that if gravity followed an inverse square law, if its strength diminished with the square of distance, then planetary orbits should be ellipses, just as Kepler had observed. But no one could prove it mathematically. Halley travelled to Cambridge to ask Newton whether he could solve the problem. Newton's response was casual. "Oh yes, I calculated that years ago." Where was the calculation? Newton couldn't find it. He promised to redo it and send it along. A few months later, Halley received a short paper containing the proof. The result was elegant, rigorous, and obviously the work of a genius. Halley immediately recognised that Newton possessed knowledge far beyond what anyone had imagined. He urged Newton to write a complete treatise on motion and gravity. Newton resisted, then relented. Once he began writing, the old obsessive focus returned. For 18 months, Newton worked with frightening intensity, sleeping little, eating irregularly, forgetting appointments. The result was Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, published in 1687. The Principia is one of the most important books ever written. In it, Newton presented his 3 laws of motion, the law of universal gravitation, and the mathematical apparatus needed to apply them to everything from falling apples to orbiting planets to tidal flows. He proved that Kepler's laws followed inevitably from gravitational attraction following an inverse square law. He explained why planets orbit in ellipses, why comets trace parabolic paths, why the moon's orbit is irregular. He unified terrestrial and celestial mechanics, showing that the same laws applied everywhere. The achievement was so far beyond anything that had come before that many readers simply couldn't follow it. Newton had written in the style of classical geometry rather than using the calculus he'd invented, partly to avoid controversy over his methods. This made the proofs more difficult to follow. The book was dense, technical, and required serious mathematical skill to understand. But those who could follow it recognized immediately that Newton had done something unprecedented. Continental philosophers initially resisted. Descartes' mechanical philosophy, which explained everything through matter in motion without mysterious forces acting at a distance, was still dominant in France and Germany. Gravity seemed like occult magic. How could the sun affect planets across empty space? Newton offered no mechanism, only mathematics. The equations worked, but what was gravity really? Newton refused to speculate. His famous phrase was, "Hypotheses non fingo." I frame no hypotheses. He would not guess at causes. He provided mathematical laws describing how gravity behaved, and those laws worked with perfect precision. That was enough. Whether gravity was caused by particles, waves, or divine action was beyond science's scope. This methodological restraint became central to scientific practice. You don't need to know why laws work, only that they do and can predict results accurately. The Principia's influence spread gradually. By 1700, most English scientists accepted Newton's system. By 1750, all of Europe had followed. Newton's laws became the foundation of physics, engineering, and astronomy for the next 2 centuries. They remain valid for most practical purposes today. After the Principia, Newton largely abandoned scientific research. He moved to London, became warden and then master of the Royal Mint, reformed England's currency, and pursued counterfeiters with vindictive zeal. Several were hanged based on evidence Newton personally gathered. He was elected president of the Royal Society and ruled it like a tyrant. He feuded bitterly with Leibniz over who invented calculus first. He died in 1727, famous, wealthy, and still bitter about old slights. Voltaire, who attended Newton's funeral, was amazed that England honoured a scientist with the pomp usually reserved for kings. He wrote, "I have seen a professor of mathematics only because he was great in his vocation, buried like a king who had done good to his subjects." This marked something new, a society that valued intellectual achievement as highly as military or political success. Newton's laws reigned supreme for over 200 years. Every prediction they made proved accurate. The return of Halley's comet in 1758, precisely when Newton's laws predicted, convinced any remaining skeptics. The discovery of Neptune in 1846 found exactly where perturbations in Uranus's orbit suggested it must be, demonstrated the law's power. Engineering marvels from steam engines to suspension bridges relied on Newtonian mechanics. Only in the early 20th century would cracks appear. Mercury's orbit didn't quite match predictions. Light behaved strangely near massive objects. At very high speeds and very small scales, Newton's laws needed modification. Einstein's relativity and quantum mechanics would provide those modifications. But even then, Newton's laws remained approximately correct for almost every situation humans encounter. The man who discovered these laws was complex, contradictory, and consumed by questions that had nothing to do with physics. While the world celebrated his triumph over nature's mysteries, Newton spent decades chasing secrets that would embarrass his admirers. After 1687, Newton's scientific work essentially stopped. He'd solved the universe. What else was there? But his mind couldn't rest. He turned that same relentless focus toward alchemy and biblical prophecy, filling thousands of pages with calculations about the end times and experiments with mercury and sulfur. Modern scholars who've examined Newton's private papers most unpublished until the 20th century, discovered something startling. He wrote more about alchemy than physics, more about theology than mathematics. The man we remember as the founder of modern science spent most of his intellectual energy on pursuits we'd now call pseudoscience. This wasn't a late-life decline. Newton had pursued alchemy throughout his productive years, running experiments in his Cambridge rooms, poisoning himself with mercury fumes, searching for the philosopher's stone that could transmute lead into gold. He believed ancient wisdom held secrets that modern philosophy had forgotten. His theological writings were equally voluminous and equally heretical. Newton rejected the Trinity. He believed Christianity had been corrupted in the 4th century, that Athanasius had introduced false doctrines. This wasn't casual doubt. Newton studied ancient texts in multiple languages, constructing elaborate arguments. If these views had become public, he'd have lost his position. Denying the Trinity was illegal in England. He also became obsessed with calculating the date of the apocalypse from biblical prophecy. He studied the book of Daniel and Revelation, correlating visions with historical events, projecting forward to determine when Christ would return. His conclusion, not before 2060, he was careful to specify this was the earliest possible date, not a firm prediction. Why did the greatest scientific mind of his age waste time on this? Perhaps because for Newton, it wasn't waste. He saw no contradiction between studying gravity and studying prophecy. Both were attempts to understand God's creation. Natural philosophy revealed God's design in nature. Alchemy and prophecy revealed God's design in history and matter's hidden properties. The same methodological rigor he applied to physics, he applied to biblical chronology. He demanded evidence, checked sources, built systematic arguments. His alchemical notebooks show careful, experimental records. He was wrong about alchemy and prophecy, but he wasn't being irrational by his era's standards. The boundaries between science and magic hadn't solidified yet. What Newton did achieve was establishing a template for how science should work. Not the alchemy and prophecy, those died with him, but the approach he used in the Principia. Mathematics describing nature, precise predictions tested against observation, no speculation about hidden causes. This method proved so powerful that it defined science for centuries. His personal life remained stunted. He never married, likely never had romantic relationships of any kind. His friendships were few and often ended in bitter feuds. He couldn't tolerate disagreement or share credit. When Leibniz developed calculus independently, Newton orchestrated a campaign to destroy him, using his position as Royal Society president to declare himself the sole inventor. The dispute over calculus priority became vicious. Newton wrote anonymous attacks on Leibniz. He had the Royal Society publish a report on the controversy, then wrote the report himself while pretending it was an independent judgment. He backdated documents to support his claims. When Leibniz died in 1716, Newton had won, but the victory was empty. Both men had invented calculus independently using different notations. Leibniz's notation proved more useful and is what we still use. Newton's final decades in London were marked by power, wealth, and continued paranoia. He never forgave those he believed had wronged him. He kept lists of enemies. His papers contained strange encrypted passages that might be alchemical secrets or might be records of nervous breakdowns. Scholars still debate which. When he died in March 1727, he was buried in Westminster Abbey with honours usually reserved for nobility. Voltaire's observation about England honouring a mathematician like a king marked a cultural shift. Intellectual achievement now commanded respect equal to military conquest or inherited title. But what was Newton's actual legacy? Not the alchemy or prophecy, which were forgotten. Not his theology, which remained unpublished and controversial. His legacy was the scientific method itself: observation, mathematics, prediction, and verification. and the three laws that explained motion throughout the universe. Those laws held for over 2 centuries. Then cracks appeared. In the late 19th century, astronomers noticed something odd about Mercury. Its orbit didn't match Newton's predictions exactly. The planet's ellipse rotated slowly, and the rotation rate was slightly faster than Newton's laws said it should be. The discrepancy was tiny, 43 arcseconds per century, but real. Scientists proposed various explanations. Maybe there was another planet inside Mercury's orbit perturbing it. They even named this hypothetical planet Vulcan. Astronomers searched. They never found it because it didn't exist. Then in 1905, a patent clerk in Switzerland published a paper that would eventually explain Mercury's orbit and transform physics more radically than Newton had. Albert Einstein's special relativity showed that space and time weren't absolute, as Newton assumed. They were relative, linked together in a 4-dimensional spacetime that could bend and stretch. 10 years later, Einstein completed general relativity, which reconceived gravity entirely. It wasn't a force at all, but the curvature of spacetime itself. Massive objects like the Sun bend spacetime around them, and planets follow the curved paths through this bent geometry. Mercury orbits close to the Sun, where spacetime is most curved, which is why its orbit behaves differently than Newton's laws predict. Einstein's equations reduced to Newton's laws for everyday situations: low speeds, weak gravitational fields. Newton wasn't wrong. He was incomplete. His laws were approximations that worked perfectly well for almost everything humans encounter. You can use Newton's laws to build bridges, launch satellites, and predict eclipses. Only in extreme conditions, near black holes at speeds approaching light, or across cosmological distances, do you need Einstein's corrections. Meanwhile, quantum mechanics was revealing another boundary. At atomic scales, Newton's laws failed completely. Particles didn't have definite positions and velocities. They existed in probability clouds. Observation affected outcomes. The clockwork universe Newton described was an approximation of a deeper reality that was fundamentally probabilistic and strange. Yet even with these revolutions, Newton's achievement remained monumental. He created the first mathematical theory that accurately described nature. He established the methods science would follow. He showed that the same laws applied everywhere: apples and moons, Earth and Jupiter. The universe was comprehensible. His personal flaws don't diminish this. Newton was paranoid, vindictive, and obsessed with alchemy and prophecy. He was also the person who figured out how the cosmos works. Both things are true. Genius doesn't require virtue. The universe doesn't care about the character of the people who discover its secrets. What Newton gave us was a way of thinking. Before Newton, natural philosophy was qualitative, descriptive, often wrong. After Newton, physics was quantitative, predictive, and increasingly accurate. He showed that mathematics was nature's language, that precise observation and calculation could reveal truths that philosophy alone never would. The Principia stands as one of humanity's supreme intellectual achievements. It's not the final word. Science never has a final word, but it was the foundation on which all subsequent physics was built. Even when Einstein revised Newton's laws, he did so by following Newton's method: mathematical precision, observational testing, and refusing to speculate beyond what evidence could verify. Today we teach Newton's laws to high school students. They seem almost obvious. Objects at rest stay at rest. Force equals mass times acceleration. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. But these statements, simple as they sound, took humanity thousands of years to formulate. The Greeks didn't know them. Medieval scholars didn't know them. Only Newton, after decades of obsessive work, finally got them right. He got them right by thinking harder and more carefully than anyone before him, by refusing to accept traditional explanations, by doing the mathematics that everyone else found too difficult, by persisting through years of calculation until the answer emerged. The result changed everything. Newton once wrote that if he had seen further, it was by standing on the shoulders of giants. This was false modesty, or perhaps a subtle insult, since he wrote it to the hunchbacked Robert Hooke. But it captured something true. Science builds cumulatively. Each generation extends what came before. Newton built on Galileo, Kepler, and Descartes. Einstein built on Newton. Future physicists will build on Einstein. But some contributions stand taller than others. Newton didn't just add to existing knowledge. He created a new kind of knowledge. He showed that the universe follows mathematical rules we can discover and verify. This wasn't philosophy or theology or mysticism. It was something new, physics. The strange recluse from Woolsthorpe, who spent his final decades chasing alchemical secrets and calculating apocalyptic timelines, nevertheless gave humanity the tools to understand reality. His laws weren't the final answer, but they were the first genuinely correct answer. That's why we still remember him while the kings and generals of his era are forgotten. Newton died believing he'd barely scratched the surface. "I do not know what I may appear to the world," he wrote near the end of his life, "but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." It was a rare moment of humility from a man not known for that quality. But he was right. The ocean of truth remained vast, yet the boy on the shore had found something extraordinary. The method for exploring that ocean, the mathematical language in which nature speaks, and the first successful map of reality itself. That was enough, more than enough. Newton transformed human understanding of the cosmos from vague speculation into precise science. The clockwork universe he described would eventually need modification, but the clockwork itself, the idea that nature follows mathematical laws we can discover, that insight endures. 3 centuries after his death, we're still following Newton's method, still using his laws for everyday calculations, still building on the foundation he established. The laws bearing his name remain the first thing students learn when they begin studying physics, not because they're the final truth, but because they're the essential starting point. Every bridge that stands, every satellite that orbits, every prediction of planetary motion that proves accurate, all of it traces back to those years in Woolsthorpe and Cambridge when a difficult, brilliant, obsessive man finally figured out how motion works. The specifics required correction. The method remained sound. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever comes after death, if anything does, Isaac Newton knows that his actual legacy outlasted both his alchemy and his prophecy. Not because he found the philosopher's stone or predicted Christ's return, but because he discovered something more fundamental, the mathematical structure underlying physical reality. That discovery echoes through every physics classroom, every engineering calculation, every space mission. The strange genius who couldn't maintain friendships, who poisoned himself with mercury, who feuded bitterly over priority disputes, nevertheless gave humanity the greatest gift one person can give another: understanding. Real, tested, verified understanding of how the world works. The boy who watched an apple fall and asked why found an answer that changed everything. Not the final answer, science never stops, but the first real answer. That's Newton's legacy. Not perfection, but the beginning of genuine comprehension. From that beginning, everything else followed. The path from Kepler's ellipses to Newton's gravity represents something more profound than scientific progress. It demonstrates how human understanding builds across generations, how one person's breakthrough becomes another's foundation. Kepler spent years filling notebooks with calculations, testing geometric models, refusing to ignore discrepancies that everyone else would have dismissed as measurement error. He discovered that planets orbit in ellipses not because it was philosophically satisfying, but because that's what the data demanded. Newton inherited those discoveries and asked the next question. Not just how planets move, but why. His answer, that gravity operates throughout the universe according to mathematical law, completed what Kepler started. But Newton couldn't have reached his conclusions without Kepler's laws. The ellipse made gravity comprehensible. The precise mathematical relationships Kepler discovered pointed directly toward universal gravitation. This is how science actually works. Not through isolated genius, but through accumulated insight. Copernicus questioned Earth's centrality. Galileo studied motion and observed the heavens. Kepler found the laws of planetary motion. Newton discovered the force that explained those laws. Each built on what came before. Each extended understanding further. What makes their achievements remarkable isn't perfection. Copernicus got many details wrong. Galileo never accepted elliptical orbits. Kepler wasted years on mystical geometric theories. Newton spent decades chasing alchemical fantasies. But their errors don't diminish their contributions. They pushed knowledge forward despite being wrong about many things, because they were right about the things that mattered most. Kepler was right that planetary motion follows discoverable mathematical laws. Newton was right that those laws emerge from universal principles. Both men demonstrated that nature operates according to patterns human minds can comprehend, not through revelation or authority, but through observation, calculation, and relentless testing of hypotheses against evidence. The universe they revealed wasn't the one their contemporaries expected. It wasn't built on perfect circles or crystalline spheres. It didn't conform to ancient philosophy or religious doctrine. It was stranger and more elegant than anyone imagined. Planets traced ellipses through curved space. Gravity operated everywhere according to precise equations. The same force that pulled apples earthward held galaxies together. This understanding came with costs. Kepler died in poverty, his salary unpaid, his grave lost to war. Newton died wealthy and honoured but emotionally stunted, having sacrificed normal human relationships for intellectual achievement. Both paid heavily for their insights. The question is whether the cost was worth it. Look at what their work enabled. Every satellite orbiting Earth follows trajectories calculated using their laws. Every space mission to distant planets relies on their equations. GPS systems, weather forecasting, telecommunications, all depend on understanding orbital mechanics that Kepler and Newton first described. The practical applications alone justify calling their work invaluable. But the deeper value transcends utility. They showed that reality is comprehensible, that the universe operates according to principles we can discover and understand, that human reason, carefully applied, can unlock nature's secrets. This wasn't obvious, it might not have been true, but it is true, and Kepler and Newton proved it. Their success established the template for modern science. Observe carefully, measure precisely. Form hypotheses, test them against data, discard what fails, refine what works. Don't appeal to authority or tradition. Don't accept explanations simply because they're comfortable or philosophically satisfying. Follow the evidence wherever it leads. This method has limitations. Science can't answer every question. It can't tell us what we should value, what makes life meaningful, or how we ought to live. Those questions require different approaches. But within its domain, understanding how nature works, the scientific method has proven spectacularly successful. The laws Kepler and Newton discovered aren't the final word. Einstein showed they needed modification at extreme conditions. Quantum mechanics revealed their limits at atomic scales. Future discoveries will undoubtedly require further revisions. That's not failure, that's progress. Each generation sees further by building on what came before. What endures isn't the specific equations, though those remain useful. What endures is the approach, the conviction that nature follows rules we can discover. the insistence on mathematical precision, the requirement that theories match observations, the willingness to abandon cherished beliefs when evidence demands it. Kepler and Newton didn't just discover laws of motion, they demonstrated that such laws exist and that human minds can find them. They showed that the universe is comprehensible rather than arbitrary, ordered rather than chaotic, governed by mathematics rather than whim. This matters because it means we're not helpless. We can understand our world. We can predict how things will behave. We can build technologies that work because we comprehend the principles underlying them. We can explore space, manipulate matter, and push the boundaries of knowledge, all because two men centuries ago figured out how planets move. Their legacy lives in every physics textbook, every engineering calculation, every scientific paper that builds on their foundation. It lives in the method they established, the questions they taught us to ask, the standards they set for what counts as genuine understanding. Neither man was perfect. Both were flawed, sometimes profoundly. But their flaws don't diminish their achievements. They saw further than anyone before them. They discovered truths that have stood for centuries. They showed that human reason could comprehend the cosmos. That's enough, more than enough. The premature infant from Wilderstadt, who survived against impossible odds, grew up to discover how planets move. The posthumous son from Woolsthorpe, who fit in a quart mug, explained why. Together, they transformed human understanding of the universe from speculation to science. Their names are remembered while emperors and generals are forgotten. Their laws are taught while religious dogmas that seemed eternal have faded. They achieved a kind of immortality that power or wealth never provides, the immortality of ideas that remain true. 3 centuries separate us from Newton's death, 4 centuries from Kepler's. Yet their work remains relevant, their insights still taught, their methods still employed. They discovered something about reality itself, something that doesn't change with fashion or culture or era. The universe operates according to mathematical laws. Human minds can discover those laws through careful observation and rigorous reasoning. These truths, once established, endure. Kepler and Newton gave them to us. We're still building on that gift, still exploring the implications, still following the path they opened. That path leads forward, always forward, toward deeper understanding. New questions replace old ones. New mysteries emerge as previous puzzles get solved. The ocean of truth Newton described remains vast, mostly unexplored, but we have the tools to explore it. We have the method that works. We have the confidence that understanding is possible. Kepler and Newton provided those tools, established that method, demonstrated that possibility. Everything that followed, from Einstein to quantum mechanics to modern cosmology, builds on their foundation. The story of how planets move became the story of how we learn to understand nature itself. 2 men separated by decades and nationality, united by obsessive curiosity and mathematical genius. One discovered the laws, the other explained them. Together, they created modern physics. Together, they showed that the universe makes sense. That's their legacy. Not perfection, but progress. Not final answers, but genuine understanding. Not magic or mystery, but mathematics and reason. They gave us a universe we could comprehend. That gift keeps giving, century after century, as we push further into the unknown, guided by the light they first kindled.